Thank you, dear God. We thank you for all that you do in our lives. We thank you and we praise you for this holy Sabbath day and also your holy presence. And we pray that you bless the speaker as she presents your truth. And we ask, Lord, that you open up our understanding, that we may teach this to others and learn it ourselves. Again, we thank you, we praise you, and we pray in your holy and mighty name. In the name of Yahshua, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to do the next presentation after the one Elaine just did. And this one is called 3 Steps of Restoration. So can you see my cursor moving around?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna open up chat to make sure I'm paying attention to questions, but if I miss some, please, because I get concentrating on what I'm reading. So if someone could watch over the chat. Okay, so this was done March 3rd, 2021 by Elder Tess. It's called 3 Steps of Restoration, and it's continuing with the same story theme that the presentation Elaine just did. It is beautiful, huh? It's a beautiful picture. All sorts of animals and color and life, water, blue skies. It's beautiful. Okay, so is this page 1? Yeah. Okay, so we're starting off with the Eden to Eden line. You can see here, so that you can know where our theme is. And Elder Tess says, I don't have one set subject matter unless you want to make it really broad. Instead, there are issues and questions that have been arising. Some have been here for a long time, but especially from the Brazilian camp meeting to now, I want to address some of what I think are misunderstandings that we have in this movement. And again, this is March 2021. There are 3 particular issues that I want to address. We won't have time for it all. Just real quick, you guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And thank you. And feel free to stop me for comments or questions. Okay, so there's 3 particular issues that she's going to address. And of course, she says she's not going to have time for all of them. But we want to look at our study of equality. It was laid out in August of 2019 as a history that takes us from Eden to Eden, from new earth to new earth. We could conceptualize it this way. We had Eden, and we are returning to Eden. Now, after Eden was after Eden here, there was sin, the sin of Eve. So there was this first sin where her and her husband separated, and Eve took the fruit. So we have sin 1. With this sin 1, there was a result of this, a curse. So what was that curse? Anyone? What was the curse that God said based on Eve eating that, even Adam eating that fruit? Sexism. Thank you. Sexism. And Susan says it was separation from each other at the beginning, the step towards individual freedom. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. So she's saying, she's adding to that more descriptively, submission of women, which is sexism, and it's described as a curse. So I know all of us, we have all talked about this before, that in the Bible, it's not, God's not going to say, if you do this, I'm going to do this to you. What he says is, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. It's just a natural progression, cause and effect. So because of what she did, there was accusations and, and so because of that, there was, finger pointing, and it became submission of women, sexism, and it's described as a curse. So then we come down to the sin of Ham. So we have Eve and then Ham, and he sins. And what was the result of his sin? Yes, slavery, racism, slavery. It is described also as a curse, not a curse as we understand curses. It's just what is stating what will inevitably come as a result of his actions. And so just, do we all understand chiasms? Everyone here, is there anyone here in our group right now that does not understand what a chiasm is? She's going to go over it again in here. So if there is anybody who's quietly not understanding them, we're going to talk about them some more right now. So look at a Bible verse that is a classic chiasm. And this one she's going to use, because there's a lot of chiasms in the Bible, but she's going to use this one as our representative today. The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So can you see the chiasm in that? Sabbath, man, and she's going to show it to us here. So the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And you've got Sabbath in the beginning, Sabbath in the end, Sabbath here, man here in the middle, man here in the middle. So like Sabbath, man, Sabbath. It's a mirror. When you hold up a mirror and it gives an exact replica of what you look like, but it switches left to right. If you were to look out for a sentence that is a chiasm, you could find these chiasms where they are exact, where the words work word by word inside. That's not what we are dealing with here in this example. You couldn't read this sentence backwards, the example that we're using. This is a phrase, the Sabbath is man, a phrase for man, another phrase not man, another phrase for the Sabbath. So you can't read that literally backwards. But the sentence constructed as a mirror image where the same theme is repeated at the very beginning and the very end. And these middle concepts are the same. So the theme Sabbath here, the theme Sabbath here, the theme man here, the theme man here. So Jesus is stating a simple fact, but this is just an example of a type of structure. It's part of our methodology. Because if you've watched Elder Parmenter, particularly going back a few years, his presentations on methodology, understanding this methodology enables us to go into not simple, but complex verses and understand through the structure what is being taught. Yeah. So Elder Parmenter here, he did quite a few presentations on parable methodology. And these are really good presentations that help us have a better understanding of this. So if you had a verse where the last part was not clear, you know the intention of the phrase because the structure of the sentence was indicated that this is just a repeat of the beginning. So we deliberately look at a simple verse, but especially more complex verses, understanding chiasms becomes powerful. So to paraphrase what she's saying, if you had a verse here that is repeated, but you don't really understand it quite here. When you read it over here, there could be more information which would help you understand this part better by reading that part. It's like a repeat and enlarge in a chiasm form, chiastic structure. So you can fill in information that you don't actually see. So if I was to do this, we started with Eden and we're ending with Eden. Start at one place and end at the same place, instead of this journey being where you start at point A and end at point B. So say you're walking on a trail and you're starting at one end is part A and you end up in another part, that's part B. But this trail is an out and back. So you're going to start at your trailhead, you're going to go all the way to the end of your trail, and then you're going to turn right straight around, and you're going to walk back in the same footsteps you just were walking, and you're going to end up back at the same trail where your car is. That's what she's saying. That's what this is. Though, you know, the Eden is written, so you're bending this line, and though you've got it looks like it's two, you're actually going out, turning around, and going straight back to end up in the same spot. So what you see going one way, you're going to see in reverse order coming back. Let's see. So we have stretched this on one line, one history, because it's time, it's linear, but you could just as well take that line and bend it because we are returning to the same place. So our entire history is working like a chiasm. This was their path away from God, and this is our path back to God. This was the degeneration of humanity, and this is the restoration of humanity. The degeneration, the restoration. So our steps through the degeneration, just like a chiasm, we're going to repeat those steps for restoration. But like a chiasm, it's a mirror image. So our first step of regeneration, back this way, what is it going to be about? So if we've got sexism, then there's worship in here, and then racism, what's going to be our next step here if we're going in reverse order? Everyone? Anyone? What's going to be, so we went from Eden, so we went sexism, racism, or sexism, worship, racism, and we're going to turn back around and walk back. What's our first step going to be here?
Racism. A couple of them put it in their racism.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm looking on the wrong side of the board. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And notice I said everyone twice. That's awesome. I'm getting it. I didn't say the bad G word. Yay. Thank you. Thank you, Lily, Susie, and Susan. And Elaine. Okay, so sexism. Okay, so somebody in the class that she was doing at that time wasn't looking at the picture correctly, and they said sexism. And so to show us how it wasn't sexism, she's going to say this. So much so she goes question mark sexism. If we say sexism, we would be saying sexism, racism, sexism, racism. Is that a chiasm? Well, no, of course not. So that would be saying like in our phrase, Sabbath man, that would be saying Sabbath man, Sabbath man. And we could argue that it's a repeat and enlarge but it's not a chiasm like this, where it's Sabbath, man, man, Sabbath. A chiasm is like this. If this is your return journey, you may see waymarks along the way. Waymark 1, 2, 3, degeneration. On your return for restoration, what's the first point you're going to come across? And so of course, the first one we're going to come across, like we were doing here, sexism, worship, racism, and everyone said racism. We're going to turn around, and our first waymark is going to be number 3, 3, 2, 1. So 3, 2, 1, restored. So if we're going to be restored towards Eden, you see waymark 3, turn around and pass over the ground of waymark 3. So this one here is racism. Now remember, the story is a chiasm. So the story is repeated here. And what happened here? What went wrong? Why did the flood come? Wait a second. Is she putting in? I'm not sure where she's pointing right here. So everybody, why did the flood? I think she's talking in here because it would be in between these two. So why did the flood come in here?
The flood came from inequality.
Yeah. Okay, so we know that now.
Use and all.
We know that now, but this is back in 2021, and she hadn't gotten to that yet. And so we were still on, so surprised, because the answer is not gonna be what you think. So going back to where we knew it was equality, we were still trying to figure out what the Sunday law was. And we were talking about, does anybody remember what we were talking about? We weren't talking about, well, what does the Sunday law have to do with?
Worship.
Yeah.
Is that where you're going? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I can't come up with a question. So we're just going to go. Let's see. Oh, I'm thinking of the different slide. But so she is going to talk about it before she gets to that answer. So
Yeah.
So sin before the flood. He's going to take his people from a populated country, from the sea to land. So from the populated area, and then it's going to be the flood. So from the sea to the land. And once they reach the land, the first issue they're going to face is one of racism, nationalism. So when does restoration start? What is the sin that makes God say, I'm done with this land, we need a new one? So that would have been in here. So we're back to the same question, basically. Why was there a flood? Only she says it in a different way. What is the sin that makes God say, I'm done with this land, we need a new one? There is sin, and what does that sin look like? There's sin, and God's solution to that sin, he's going to take his people from what to what? Okay, from sea to land. Build them an ark and take them from sea to dry land and make a new start on a desolate continent over here. So the 1260 years of church and state. This is the what I think what she was trying to get to. The sin was church and state, that combination. But see, that was back in 2021, and we've like pulled away from that. We still know it's equality, but we didn't see exactly what this was, because now it's culture and state. But that church and culture is that patriarchy, right?
Yeah, but she's looking at the 1260 years up on the board there.
Right.
to-
Exactly. Right. But she's saying right here, she's saying the sin was church and state. Because she sees, let me
Yeah.
finish reading and you'll see. So 1260 years of church and state sin. So we should have known that the sin that caused the flood was not some type of sexual revolution. The sin that caused the flood was the same sin that you would have observed in the 1260. It wasn't the idea of rampant immorality with the Protestant idea of immorality that was instituted in the 1260. Sin needs a new start in a desolate land. Prophetically, they went from sea, the multitudes of Europe, to the land, the United States, the lamb-like beast. What is the first issue that that new country has to address?
Racism.
Racism. Degeneration to restoration, and the path towards the restoration began with the time of the end in 1798, where God takes a people and he brings them back to himself. If we were to work our way inwards, Eden, we walked with God. We will walk with God after the second advent. I'm hoping we can see it. We walked with God. Sin came, brought pain and degeneration to us physically, and we began to fall away from him, from God. We are restored to God before we get a new body, physical restoration. We walk with God, and then we are given Eden. The degeneration and restoration works perfectly like a chiasm. And that sin that brought that last curse in the life of Noah is the very first step that God has to take to restore us. So sin, the 1260, the earth swallows up the flood and the curse is dealt with. So first, sexism, then racism, two sins. What is the sin in the middle that we are forgetting? We have Eve and Ham, and who is here in the middle missing?
That's Cain and worship.
Yeah. So we'll go to Genesis. Racism hasn't come yet, and we're in between the time of Eve and the time of Ham. Three particular sins. Cain, in the book of Genesis, we have Eve, then Cain, then Ham. What was the sin of Cain? Yes, Susie says false worship. So Cain says, I want to worship God the way I want to worship God. What does that really matter? We will paraphrase from Patriarchs and Prophets 80.3 from the middle of the paragraph, quote, the children of Adam that remained loyal to God honored the Sabbath, but Cain and his descendants did not respect that day. They chose their own time for labor and for rest, regardless of Jehovah's express command. So Cain says, what does it matter what God says? I'll worship how I want and when I want. And the issue is worship and the Sabbath, their version of the Sabbath. So Eve, Cain, Ham, three sins. The result of Eve was sexism. God did not want that. And God did not institute that any more than he instituted racism. It's the inevitable result. So Eve, sexism was the consequence. For Cain, a violation of the Sabbath. Ham, nationalism. So that was how we fell and degenerated away from God. And those same three early steps from the time of the end from when we went to the sea, from the sea to the land, God is undoing in reverse order 3, 2, 1. So sexism, worship, racism, racism, worship, sexism. Alpha history, racism. We undo the sin of Ham, and what comes next? The Sabbath in 1888. The test is racism in Millerite history, and the test is worship and the Sabbath in 1888 history. If you go to the sin of Eve, there is no history after that. If God's people start tackling the subjects of gender, do you realize how close we are on our return journey? We are dealing with the results of the sin of Eve. And you know what the problem is? People inside and outside of Adventism, people inside and outside of this movement love sin. They don't just love sin, they love what came from sin. They love the results of sin. And if you love the results of sin and God takes you to heaven, what will happen?
You won't like it.
Yeah, sin, yeah, because you won't like it. And
Second time.
yeah, and sin will rise up a second time. So the end of ancient Israel, Jesus says to the disciples, I have many things to tell you, but you can't bear them. What they couldn't bear to hear, we are required to hear. What Jesus didn't dare say, this movement is required to speak. Just like the man of sin had to be revealed, other steps had to be taken before the second advent. Eve's eyes were open to understand the difference between good and evil. Too many people in this movement call patriarchy good, the dowry system good, culture good. Our eyes need to be open to understand the difference between good and evil. I said that I would be presenting on issues I know are questions in this movement. And the thought that I've seen multiple times, sometimes said gently and sometimes with a bit more of a clear intention, I'm going to word what I hear people say, and there are different variations of how this is said. So these are what people are saying. We are so tired of hearing you talk about gender and sexism. Talk about Black Lives Matter. Talk about racism. Talk about the Sabbath. We like hearing about all those things. Why do you just keep repeating the same thing over and over again? Sexism, sexism, sexism. I hope I am not misunderstood, but the underlining test of the Omega history is not racism. The underlining test is not Black Lives Matter. That was Alpha. We all know it's not Sabbath, but it's not racism. The test of the Sunday law will not be about racism. That was over 170 years ago. The issue in our dispensation, the center of our issue, is not the sin of Ham. It's also not the sin of Cain. It's Adam and Eve. We've gone virtually to the beginning, and that's why I won't stop talking about gender. That will be the Sunday law issue. Any questions so far? Comments? Okay, so now we all know how the beginning and the end works. The beginning shows you what the end is going to look like. When it comes to our Alpha history, the issue is racism, but God was still poking us along, sexism. Ellen White First time God is going to use a woman in that kind of role. First time we get a record of written inspiration from the hand of a woman. The issue is equality. The issue is sexism. But prior to 1989, there were three movements. First, the civil rights movement. Second wave feminism. Third, Stonewall LGBTQ or LGBT. Sorry. So we got first civil rights, second wave feminism, Stonewall LGBT. And that's all before 1989. Racism, sexism. Racism was in the alpha, sexism in the omega. And God did start with sexism in the alpha history, but since God wasn't able to come, Jesus wasn't able to come back in that time, God's going to finish it here. These issues of gender were in our alpha history. So I want to be clear, the issues of race are in our omega history. They still exist externally and internally. But the test that divides the people of God at the end of the world will not be racism. If people still keep Sunday when they know better, God just moved on without them. If people are still racist, God just moves on without them. This is not to ignore the consistent issue of nationalism inside this movement. But the issue of nationalism only became an issue in this movement once we started introducing the subject of gender. And people said, that's not what I relate to. That's not what my state taught me. My culture, my region, my tribe.
Can I ask
all
a
of us.
question?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that look like? Let me go back to where she says, where God just moved on without them. So like when people were tested on let me get it right, the Sabbath, and they didn't, they kept on going with Sunday, God moved on without them. Then when they were tested on racism, if they were continue to be racist, God moved on.
Mhm.
And so what does that look like? Because when we're tested on gender, on sexism, and if you continue to be a sexist, God is just going to move on without you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so like when we look at the histories, when you look back at those histories, what did that look like when God just moved on without them? Like they didn't even know God. I mean, for those who were claiming that God was with them and they were still racist and trying to use the Bible to justify their racism, God was not with them.
Right.
And some of them were thinking that God was still. And
What
so,
about
yeah.
those people on the far right now that are holding up their Bibles and saying, I'll pray for you. And, we all believe in Jesus, and yet they all are packing guns and they're all talking about killing off the FBI. What do you think about them?
Yeah,
Right.
God is not with them, like that's really interesting how that looks like, because it's so, to me, I don't know if anyone else is saying that, is just so, that's kind of like, I don't know if I have the right word, but I want to say simple, but I know that's not, I mean, it's just like God moves on. Like, yeah, you're still living your life and thinking that, and you're continue to be racist, but God is like moved on without you. Like, well, what does that look like in our like time when Christ is coming back in our history? I don't know, like,
and you can see it in their personality, in their actions. You can see that God has moved on without them, even though they're thumping their Bible and they're saying, let's do this for Jesus. You can see that God's not with them. We can see it, right?
Right. Yes, I get that, but it's just, I'm also speaking for those like that's, we see that, but even in the movement, even, I mean, both externally and internally, like my mind is thinking kind of beyond a little bit, even when it comes to reaching out to the Nethinims, or I mean, well, Levites and then Nethinims is really interesting.
Well, it, you know, going through the Sunday law being the great test, right? To where God's people are tested, they'll just go on thinking that they're on the right side of the issue. Things will be normal, you know.
Yeah, but that's so weird because
Yeah.
like there's so, for things to continue to be on so normal, and you got like, well, I guess I'm still like, I don't know everything. So, but you have like the time and trouble, like, I mean, when you think of when things really hit the fan, you know, that's really interesting. Because we're still in like a time of peace, but I'm just thinking like, wow.
Elder Parmenter said a long time ago, back when he was, well, he's probably said it before, but when we were in rescue and he was there, that things are just going to look like they do, normal. And I've always remembered that thought. And then when you really look back at this history that we're, you know, repeating, you're looking at the Millerite history and looking at that structure that Christ was to come in 1863. What was life like from 1850 to 1861 before the close of probation? I don't know if
That's-
that's where your
well-
question stems from, but that's where I was kind of thinking you might be stemming it from. There's no big apocalyptic event. It just, life just goes on the way it is.
Yeah, that's
If that's what you were thinking.
well, no, I mean, there's so sorry. My mind is thinking about things, but it is really interesting. Not, but I guess partially, but yeah, in that history, they were, well, 1861, that was the Civil War, so there was that. But that's really interesting.
Well, in the history of the Millerites, like when Jesus moved from the holy place to the most holy place, right, and people were still praying, and those who did not move to the most holy place, they were praying to Satan, and Satan was giving them the power and something else, but without the love and without, can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like nothing, you know, they just moved on.
Right. I know the history, and it's just kind of wow. But I mean, to look, I don't know. For me, I don't know what that look. I wonder what that really looks like, and because we're living in our time, so it's really, it's just going to be like that, like just normal, and then wow. But yeah, I mean, I like, when I heard this presentation before, it was like, yeah, but this time I'm thinking like, whoa, God just moves on. And what, I mean, we're at the, I don't know, there's just kind of like a thought, sorry, I don't want to prolong it, but it's just like, whoa, it's just gonna be like God just, you know, things just continue. But that's interesting because I'm thinking about the events that's because when I think about 9/11 and I think about how that's just a taste of what, you know, the close of probation, what am I thinking about? Yeah, the close of probation is going to look like. That's really interesting.
It's kind of scary, like you were saying, also within this movement, because there are, I mean, Elder Tess keeps saying it, you know, there are people in this movement that aren't actually here. I mean, they're sitting here, but they're not really in it. So I don't know, it makes me worry about myself. I'm like, well, I'm here, you know, and I want this, but like, what if I'm totally missing it, the whole point, and God's already moved on without me? I don't know.
Yeah,
It scares
like,
me.
Oh, yeah, it is a little bit frightening in that sense, but yeah, it's really interesting and how, well, in my mind, and how simple that looks like, and God just moving on. But I think it's more complicated than what my mind is trying to um is contemplating, as far as how simple that sounds. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, that
Yeah,
just
yeah, well, I believe that God strives with you, with everyone. Oh,
Yeah.
strives and strives and strives with everyone until there is a point where he can do no more. Then he moves on. I don't think he just, I don't think he just carelessly and flippantly move on.
Well, yeah, that's not, I understand that. That's not where my mind is, like, as far as how God is striving, but as far as just how simple in God, you want to continue to be racist, God moves on. And I mean, that is the fact, but how that looks like, that's interesting.
Definitely doesn't look like what we'd always expected.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to know, like how everything just, living in these times, and just as it progresses until Christ comes back, and what that really looks like. I mean, and I can start to see how, the simple, but I think it's more complicated than just, I don't know, sorry.
Kind of interesting too, the that people have to pass, humanity has to pass this test without this big apocalyptic event, without this, what we'd always, if we were reading of thus saith the Lord, you're going to hear the voice of God speak and all these other things. They don't get all that. We've been listening to the voice of God speak, and
Amen.
and they don't want it. You know what I mean? So in going back to the study from the study before lunch, that conservative faction of Calvinism, they wouldn't leave their hierarchy. It wasn't because God was sending a message, hey, you got to leave your hierarchy. You know what I mean? You got to go reason and think for yourself. It was the pull between that liberal and conservative, the fight between the liberal and conservative factions, that was God was using to draw them and prepare them for the next step, which would be to hear the message of the 2300 days, and that Jesus is coming soon. So is an external.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I don't want to cut you off. Sorry. It just clicked. Something clicked. Sorry. Well, I guess what clicked in my mind, and you can correct me, but I just think that, this is God's movement. So as God is moving, we're to follow. And so as light increases, if you don't, accept that light, then, God moves on, the movement just keeps on going. But yeah,
there was quite a few comments, and
I posted a big long thing, sorry, that was kind of somewhat along with this, if you want to read it. If you don't, you guys can read it later.
Yeah, if it would be helpful, I'll do it. So Troy says, like before the flood, everything was normal until the rain began and continued. And so it's going to be like that. It's just going to be normal until we can see Christ, I think. I don't know. And then Sarah, the history of Noah is a lesson too. Susan, no sweet love, joy, and peace. Elaine added in several verses that will be helpful. So these are from, is this a bio? To bio?
Yeah.
Do you know where that's from?
Yeah, some of it's from the testimonies, I believe, but we'll kind of see it as it goes through. It's pulled from different places, but it's
Okay.
in the bio.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is the church given a preview. The Union and the Confederate forces, having gained a glimpse of the involvements and proportions of the struggle ahead, began to dig in for a long and bitter conflict. Near the close of the year, the government appointed a day for the nation to unite in fasting and prayer. On Sabbath, January 4th, 1862, God disclosed to Ellen White in vision many elements relating to the war, its prosecution, the philosophy behind it, the protected struggle ahead, and the futility of the national fast under the circumstances. And that's from 2 Bio 38.4. It seems impossible to have the war conducted successfully, for many in our own ranks are continually working to favor the South, and our armies have been repulsed and unmercifully slaughtered on account of the management of these pro-slavery men. Some of our leading men in Congress also are constantly working to favor the South. 2 Bio 28.5. In this state of things, proclamations are issued for national fast, for prayer that God will bring this war to a speedy and favorable termination. I was then directed to Isaiah 58, 5-7. Quote, is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? I saw that these national fasts were an insult to Jehovah. He accepts no such fast. Testimony is for the church. 256 and 257.2. And then this put Seventh-day Adventists in a vantage position with an understanding of what to expect. In the lead article in testimony number 7, Ellen White declared, thousands have been induced to enlist with the understanding that this war was to exterminate slavery. But now that they are fixed, they find that they have been deceived, that the object of this war is not to abolish slavery, but to preserve it as is. In view of all this, they inquire, if we succeed in quelling this rebellion, what has been gained? They can only answer discouragingly, nothing. That which caused the rebellion is not removed. The system of slavery, which has ruined our nation, is left to live and stir up another rebellion. The feelings of thousands of our soldiers are bitter. Referring to the treachery of congressmen and of Union Army officers who were sympathetic with the South, she declared, quote, as this war was shown to me, it looked like the most singular and uncertain that has ever occurred, end quote. As to international repercussions, she stated, I was shown that if the object of this war had been to exterminate slavery, then, if desired, England would have helped the North. But England fully understands the existing feelings in the government, and that the war is not to do away with slavery, but merely to preserve the Union, and it is not for her interest to have it preserved.
So we can see that today, only change it all out with equality. In the North and the South with the Democrats and the Republicans, and the fight is about gender equality. And if I understand that correctly, the North, there were those in the North that were sympathetic to the pro-slavery South. So all they wanted was unity. They wanted to preserve the Union and not get rid of the sin.
Yeah.
So from what I understand then, is motivation is just as important why you're doing it. Because you're not doing it, your motivation is not to get rid of slavery. Your motivation is to preserve a union. So why you do what you do is just as important.
Yes.
So we could bring that back to abortion and women's rights issues right now.
Yes.
So why they're doing it, I mean, like, depending upon what side you're on, those who are supporting pro-choice, why they're doing it, matters. I don't know if that helps.
Now, why do you want to continue with the abortion? Is it because you really believe that women has autonomy over her own body, over her own mind, her own choice? Or do you believe in abortion just to give up to them to keep them quiet?
To get their votes.
Right, to get their votes.
Are you going to fix the problem of equality? Or are you going to preserve the union?
Exactly. Because we know on the far left, they, don't believe any more that women should have full rights either. I mean, right. Am I thinking that?
Interesting.
What's that?
I thought it was interesting in here. I'm trying to find it where she says that Adventists were given a view of these things, but I thought it was at the beginning of one of them. So I had to copy it several times. This put Seventh-day Adventists in an advantage position with understanding of what to expect. So we've definitely, I think somebody posted in the chat somewhere along the lines that we have the prophetic understanding of the events that are happening. So we know what to expect.
Right. That makes sense.
So the compromise will be intended to preserve unity, won't be to fix the problem. Yeah, I don't know what all it looks like with that quote now as we look at the issues on the right and the whole makeup of those on the right and the whole culture issue. But we definitely have a prophetic view. And we know that this is a history of failure for feminism. And the feminism lost, right? And then it's a success for God's people. But the nation itself, we talked about this, I think, last week or so. I think it was something Christine said. When you talk about filling the cup, we fill the cup with sin as opposed to correcting the problem of inequality.
Right.
And therefore, bring on the Sunday law.
Right. Because for each of the different structures, they're all success. And our success isn't stopping the cup getting filled up. Our success is in teaching God's character.
Yeah, I was kind of processing that in my head while you were saying that, because you have to take that history and compare and contrast.
Correct.
Because God's people failed, but in our history, God's people succeed. In that history, the abolitionists failed, succeeded.
Uh-huh.
So there was no Sunday law. So there's definitely different things you have to put into all that. But anyways, it all looks, we have the prophetic vantage, but to what it looks like in the world, to humanity, this is the way I comprehend it in my mind, is it shows what's really in your heart. Do you really love humanity or not? And when I put that little circle with love in the middle, right?
Yeah.
You claim that you love, but there's these particular groups that you exclude. You know, because I watch it with my own family, that none of them ever went to church. You know, I'm the only Christian in the family. They didn't go to church, and yet suddenly they're espousing, you know, about who God is and what God is and what God stands for and what God hates, and they show their hate.
Yeah.
You know, I think I talked about this, but I think it was a Wednesday. I don't remember. But one of them posted a picture of, oh, maybe I didn't. One of them posted a picture of San Francisco and then commented about how sad and how, because of what San Francisco is now, what it's turned into. They didn't put the LGBTQ title to it, but that's what they meant.
Right.
That they don't even have any desire to go to San Francisco anymore because of what it is. And yet they don't see that as hate.
Right. They love all those people who look just like them.
Yeah.
Well, they don't see that as hate because they have their Apis bull, their own image of God, who hates these kind of people in their mind. So it's okay
Right.
for them to hate.
And they dehumanize those people.
Yes.
And so if they're dehumanized, they're not hating because they're not human.
My mind kind of stirred around with that one. Like every now and then I want to say something, but I don't want to say something that's just going to provoke this fight. I would walk away from it anyways on Facebook. But you know, when you think about Islam, or you know, the Arab nations, and what is the religion of these Arab nations? Islam, right? And isn't it these radical, like Wahhabism, the radical Islamic religionists that are the ones that are controlling their governments?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was tempted to take that route, but in my mind, I couldn't process that they needed to make the connection, because their connection of the prototype of God is, and I don't mean like the Apis bull, so to speak, but Islam's not a religion. You know what I'm saying? Like they would view it as, well, that's, you know, God is true religion, so Islam doesn't count. But it's the same thing. It's a religion controlling the state that is persecuting, suppressing, and oppressing, whatever other adjective you can put on it, to women and LGBTQ people. So
Right.
what makes the United States any different?
It doesn't. It's not. The whole world is in the same rut.
Yeah.
It's not just the United States. The whole world is following after. I mean, God's coming for the second advent for the whole world. So it's not going to be just the United States that is like this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that conversation came up. Thank you, Victoria. That was good. I hope that helped you too.
Yeah. It helped a lot. I guess sometimes my mind tends to kind of overthink on things. So like when it is simply, and for me to imagine what that looks like, you know, I mean, it just seems like it's like that was so simple, like, whoa. And then, but I feel like it's like so much more kind of complicated when, I don't know, when you, and looking at, I don't know, it's just, I still, I mean, I believe and I accept, but I just say like how that looks like with God just moving on. Like I still can't, well, I don't want to be an example of that, but I just, I don't like, but I just, it just kind of my mind is trying to digest that thought, I guess. I mean, I heard it before, but it's just still kind of wrapped in my mind, and how that sounds like it's so, and I believe it because it is true. In the time of Noah, it did, like time went on and then the flood came and it was just like boom. But it's just kind of like, whoa, to be living in the midst of this, and to see everything happen and just like, whoa, everything's so normal, and then boom, Christ comes back and it's like, whoa, yeah.
I think about the Omega of ancient Israel, when the in 34 AD, the message went to the world. You made your choice on one side or the other, right? Life
Right.
still went on. You went on. What is Ellen Whitehaven writes about it too? That they went on at the altar praying, but they were praying to Satan. Life just goes on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. Yeah.
Earlier, we were talking about when the abolitionists succeed, God's people fail,
Fail.
right? There'll be no Sunday law, right? So the world will progress. And I was just thinking about, we're just talking about the time of Noah, and as Jesus said, as in the days of Noah, as in the days of Lot. So those two are mentioned, and so when you kind of put God's people, abolitionists, and the number of people that can be saved, or the number of people that's found righteous, as in the days of Lot, I think there's a combination of all those three things that, like the flood, God has to intervene. The world is becoming so wicked. There's a combination of those things, that God's timing, and when God says it's the right time, because there's nothing more that God can do, and God just has to intervene.
Yeah.
Anybody else? So Jackie says the Nethinims are being harvested. What does it mean? Nethinims are being harvested. Are they being harvested right now? No, that right now it's the Levites.
Yeah, Levites, but the Levites join the 144,000, and then it goes to the Nephilim, right? The message
At Sunday Law.
at Sunday Law.
Uh-huh.
So, but these people, I mean, whether they're Levites or whether they're out in the world, the Nephilim, these people are already, God already knows who they are, the ones that will step forward and accept his truth, his message.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know how that looks.
Right. Yes, I hear you, Jackie. Like that's true. Like in what you're saying, or the point that I think you're bringing out, and that with those, I mean, if you're racist or sexist, if you but we're talking about sexism for our time. So, but still, if you're racist, you know, that's not okay either. But I'm just saying, if you are still sexist and you don't accept the message, you know, then you're going to be passed by. God is going to move on without you. So that means that those in the world who are, you know, sexist, you know, that's interesting as far as the streams and what they're drinking from, you know, if they, when we go to them with this truth, if they don't, but it's interesting because all we're doing is just harvesting. All we're doing
Right.
is harvesting. So that's interesting. That's the point. Yeah, that's where, yeah, I get what you're saying and what that looks like, because my mind went there too, and what that looks like as well, because we're just doing the harvesting. So they have already decided in their hearts as to whether they will continue to be sexist, or they'll you know, based on the information, based on what they see, you know, yeah, they're making their choices.
Exactly what they see at this point. You know, with the external events that are taking place, they're making choices over that. Now, Adventists are in a different category. Well, Levites, they are the Levites, but you know, they still have to be on the right track with the truth, or what they do know. If they're sitting in the churches and they don't, all they're doing is listening to what the preachers are saying, they're not going to know anything. I mean, they will know nothing. They won't see what we see, of course.
We'll look at the previous studies as well, that they have to make that transition from, in the Great Awakenings, they had to leave their Calvinistic, strict Calvinistic principles, or whatever you call them, ways, and come into, you know, accept the liberal view of things. But then they had to make that transition. And why did they not make that transition? They have to be tested. Remember,
Yes.
they have to be tested, and they profess to love Jesus, but when it came to accepting the message, they showed that they didn't. So that's, I think that's, you know, what some of what it'll look like is people that profess equality will demonstrate by their own actions that they really don't
Amen.
believe in equality.
Yes. They say it, but they don't live it.
Right.
Yeah, Susan has a thought there too. We used to think the Nephilims would be easier for us than the Levites, but I think we will be being so hotly persecuted that it will be a painful time. Yeah. I'm sure it is going to be. Can't even imagine.
Well, that was good.
Thank you, Victoria. And yeah, to sort through these things that are running through my mind as as we talk about some of these thoughts, it's we can't just see everything all as it's going to happen just exactly. Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
we have an idea, but we don't see it completely. At least I don't.
I know they mean
I guess I just wanted to add, that even though we go through pain, persecution, we don't know how it will look, but we will have the love and the joy and the peace in our hearts. And I think that will carry us through to the end.
Faith,
Yes, amen.
we have hope and faith.
Exactly. Yes, thank you, everyone.
Does anybody have anything to add? Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so I'll read this one. Love that song. Okay. Now we all know how the beginning and the end works. The beginning shows you what the end is going to look like. When it comes to our alpha history, the issue is racism, but God was still poking us along, sexism. Ellen White, first time God is going to use a woman in that kind of role. First time we get a record of written inspiration from the hand of a woman. The issue is equality. The issue is sexism. But prior to 1989, there were three movements. First, the civil rights movement. Second, the second wave feminism. Third, Stonewall LGBT. These issues of gender were in the alpha history. So I want to be clear, the issues of race are in our omega history. They still exist externally and internally, but the test that divides the people of God at the end of the world will not be racism. If people still keep Sunday when they know better, God just moved on without them. If people are still racist, God just moves on without them. This is not to ignore the consistent issue of nationalism inside this movement, but the issue of nationalism only became an issue in this movement once we started introducing the subject of gender. And people said, that's not what I relate to. That's not what my state taught me, my culture, my region, my tribe. All of a sudden, a nationalism came out. The core of the issue is gender. The Sunday law is gender. Now people may ask, what about LGBTQ? Where does that come into? So I know we had read this already, but I wanted to read it again after our, in light of our conversation. So I want to move on. We don't have much time left. That's all gender. That's all an issue back in Eden. When we say racism, it is broad. It's nationalism that is universally pervasive. Sexism is broader than we realized. I don't want to go into the subject of LGBTQ today, but I do want to make the point that its roots in gender stereotypes. I mean, it's rooted. So LGBTQ is rooted in gender stereotypes. So if you have a man and a man, what roles are they meant to fit into in the family? So when we say alpha racism, omega sexism, sexism encompasses not just the rights of women, it also encompasses all of the questions related to LGBTQ. We've only got through one of the 3 points, so we're going to move on to the next point. A story was shared in the media broadcast recently, and this was of the Yazidi, I don't think I'm saying it right, Yazidi women. And I'm just going to tell their story in brief. The Yazidi religion is quite unique. It's considered by external sources to be the oldest religion in the world. They don't allow converts, and it's deeply patriarchal. We will paraphrase their story for those who haven't read it. What ISIS did to the Yazidi community was essentially genocide. They slaughtered thousands of people. They captured the women and brought them into the sexual slavery and forced marriage. So consider yourself as one of those women, community slaughtered by ISIS, forced into marriage into an ISIS fighter and raped, finally liberated. So now we're talking about those women are now liberated after all that trauma. Yeah. And their elders and their families and their communities, they all tell them, you can come back. But there's a problem. We are patriarchal. Those children you had with ISIS men belong to the ISIS soldiers. They have the religion of their father. So your 6-month little girl is Muslim. We hate her father. She can't convert to the mother's religion because we don't allow converts, because we are patriarchy. She's born with her father's religion, and if you want to keep your little children, don't come back at all. So the freed women are given a choice: never be welcomed back to their own community, or leave their children behind and bring their children with them. Wait. Never be welcomed back to their community, or leave their children behind, or bring their children with them and possibly see their children murdered. Okay, so they have 3 choices. So they can leave their own community, they can leave their children, or they can risk their children's lives by bringing their children back. Yeah, almost too ugly to think about. I agree, Susan.
It's horrible.
Yeah. This was a story in the New York Times. So
Inhumane.
what's that? Inhumane.
I'm sorry.
Very
Yeah.
difficult.
I'm just saying inhumane.
How could you even choose, you know?
Yeah.
You're gonna most likely love your child, right?
Right.
And you're freed all of a sudden, but you're a woman in these circumstances. What freedom do you really have? You can't work, none of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
Such
You
a
just be
society.
homeless.
You're dependent on males.
Yeah.
And so what kind of choice are any of those? You know what I mean?
Right. None of them are good. That's hard. So this was a story in the New York Times. So some of these women who have been captured by ISIS, fled ISIS, then taken back by their communities and leaving their children at orphanages. They then fled their own families. They've gone back to those orphanages and grabbed their children and are waiting with hope that another country will take them in. My question is this: where do you want to send them? To Switzerland, that has just banned head coverings? To Germany, Portugal, or Spain, that are crumbling to the far right? And don't get me started on France. Where do you want to send them? You can say it will be better, but people come to the West expecting freedom, and they are surprised when they don't find it.
The city on the hill, the one without walls that was supposed to take in the suffering and the oppressed,
Right,
those that were searching for freedom.
right,
What does the city on the hill say? Build a wall.
right. It's sad. One more story. I want to talk about Korea. I'm going to quote from a Wikipedia page: Gender equality in South Korea.
Inequality.
Thank you. Gender inequality in South Korea. They have deep-rooted patriarchal ideologies, and South Korea is consistently ranked as one of the worst in the world for gender equality of any industrialized nation, especially when it comes to economy and politics, which is one word: power. During World War II, thousands of these Korean women were forced to become sexual slaves for the Japanese army, called comfort women. During the Korean War, the United States enlisted more than 1 million South Korean women into military prostitution. 1 million. What? And these weren't just sexual acts. This was violence. And the European Journal of Women's Studies, they discussed how the soldiers of lower rank, because they were subjected to harsh treatment from higher ranked soldiers, not just sexually abused, but open violence was their way, I guess, of preserving their masculinity. And what happened to women during those wars in Korea is believed to have impacted the equality those women could have today. What is expected of a modern woman from South Korea. Yeah, I remember that too. Phil telling us about the comfort women. I forgot about that. It's just sad. It reminds me of this story where the men come to the door and they, instead of giving them the man, they give them the woman. I forget all the names right now, but in the Bible, just it's like the women are, they have no, what's that?
Lot.
Yeah, Lot. Yeah, exactly. They're inhuman, so they're just an animal, a service animal. So toss them out there. It's so infuriating and sad. It's said that even a gender pay gap is worse of any industrialized countries. We could do a whole presentation on their beauty standards, makeup, skin bleaching, and plastic surgery, where they are expected to not look just perfect, but pre-puberty. So they are facing massive societal obstacles in their own country. The question is, where will you escape to? Where does everyone escape to? There's not a place on this earth. Susan says, this message gives the answer to that story. I never understood why giving his daughters was an alternative. Yeah. Yeah. So the glorious land, until a 21-year-old Southern Baptist, just like when you start a health kick and you're sick of eating junk food, you go to your pantry and you find all that junk food and you throw it all away so it doesn't tempt you. And a young man with a sex addiction went to his pantry and slaughtered 4 South Korean women to remove his temptation. Where do you send them? So that was in the United States. This is the issue that I don't understand why people are not getting. People in Australia want to take to the streets and fight for women's rights in Australia, social activism. I can do that. I have a right to be safe, but I could march that march and say, keep me safe from all of those refugees, and know that it's the South Sudanese refugees that are viewed that way. I'm not questioning the fact that people march for good causes with good motivations. That was the civil rights movement. But there is no march for the Yazidi women. If we see this problem is universal as it is, do we realize our high calling? You will send people from abuse to abuse to abuse to abuse. Good external agencies just try to make sure that abuse is better abuse than the abuse that they were already in. I fear people in this movement do not see their calling. What we have is the opportunity to change the mind with the hope of eternity. And people seem to be leaving ministry positions with a thought that with a little bit of money, they can make the abuse less for the body. I don't think I understand really what,
Yeah, I don't understand the last sentence.
I think she's talking about, instead of ministry work, going out and getting into the marches and getting involved to try to do something that way.
oh, and she thinks, of course, that we should be here studying and learning because this is our training
Yeah,
and we have to know the message.
yeah, because I think she mentioned something along those lines in the previous slide. That she could go in March. But that's not gonna do it.
It's not going to make a difference here because we can all see that, right? That no matter what we do, if we're not doing our job, which is to learn this message, if we're out there protesting and marching and things like that, that is not going to make a difference to this world because this world is going under. We can't change that because that side has already won that part of the war. I mean, their line, right? Our line is to be successful in our job, which is learning this message so we could be about the harvest and showing people God's true character, right?
And the marches really don't. They might make it a place where the abuse is less, but the whole patriarchal structure still exists.
Exactly.
And
And
the only solution is radical feminism, and we have to ask ourselves, are we radical feminists? Do we know what a radical feminist is yet?
I guess that's where I get stuck is because I see a radical feminist going out there and saying something, doing something, being active. But but I get the impression that we're supposed to be here studying. So that's where I get stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the
That
whole
makes sense.
patriarchal. Go ahead, Victoria. Is that Victoria?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just said that makes sense.
Okay.
The whole patriarchal structure has to come down, and it can't. It's a mindset. It's 6,000 years deeply embedded mindset that has to be unraveled and undone. And to have it unraveled and undone in us, and then through the messages prayerfully unravel in the minds of others. So going out and marching, how does that unravel their mindset?
Right. So the way I'm seeing it is that in individuals, starting with ourselves, this patriarchy has to be undone within our own mindset, our own mind, our own thoughts, so we can help others dismantle it in their thoughts. But we can't dismantle it in the government because the world is it's the cup is full.
Amen.
Right? Am I getting it?
Yeah, so what's the nature of the king? And the nature of the kingdom. What's the nature of the kingdom of heaven? What's the nature of God?
Equality.
Equality. So if thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then the kingdom of God has to be in us.
In us, in our mindset.
Yeah. And that makes us citizens of, we are then citizens of heaven, as ambassadors on earth for those that will want true equality. I don't know everything it's gonna look like, but
Okay. Thank you.
I guess to add, we all have our little spheres of influence. So
Yeah.
each
yeah,
and every member has a sphere of influence. So and you, like you were saying, Christine, in dismantling sexism within yourself or patriarchy within yourself, you're changing, your mindset is changing. And so, and those you interact, because you're living it, you're not just professing it, you know, you are living it, people see that. And it's maybe through that change in you, or, you know, something in you that they see, you know, that, or just in those various opportunities in which God, I don't know, makes as far as harvesting people, then, you know, it creates that door to reach others just within each member's sphere of influence, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Thank you.
Listening to Elder Terry's last presentation, this, what, about maybe a month ago now, 3 weeks ago? And I know we discussed some of it, but one of the things that Elder Terry defined for us is the term radical. I know we're talking about radical feminism. What does it mean to be radical feminists? And what Elder Terry, which I never knew, said that radical is actually the very beginning part, the very first part of the root before, you know, before it branches out. It's the root.
Right.
So we have to look at, you know, the radical feminism, the root of feminism, and the early, the very beginning of what that means, what that looks like. And I think maybe that's something that we don't all have the grasp of yet.
Amen, Phil. I agree.
Yeah. Susan says, go to definition, the plot of roots of sin are being replaced by the new radical root. So the question was asked, what does it mean then the personal is political? So based on our subject, what we were talking about, I'm guessing that because we're learning in our minds, we're breaking down patriarchy. What does it mean the personal is political?
Personal is political. That means your profession and your practice is the same, whether you're in public life or in private life. Doesn't change.
And you stepped, I don't know if this is right, but I don't know how to say it right. You have stepped outside the patriarchal structure. You're no longer in the patriarchal structure, and your life is a testimony to that, whatever that looks like. But you don't accept the patriarchal structure.
Right, that's the radical feminist view, is you dismantle the entire system of patriarchy. Do not work within it, do not compromise with it, you dismantle it. Privately, publicly, that is your life. You profess, your profession and your practice is consistent, is the same.
And so like the quote that we read earlier, you don't set out to preserve unity. You set out to take down the patriarchal structure. So like in that quote, they didn't, it wasn't that they wanted to get rid of slavery, do away with slavery, which was the sin that filled the cup. They just wanted to preserve the union. And the radical feminists won't accept patriarchy in order to preserve the union.
I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it.
Cool. So there, so in the chat, there was a lot going on. Were all the questions answered? Mary, you had 2 questions. Did the conversation answer your questions, Mary?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Did anybody else have any other questions or anything to add? A great conversation. So thank you. Thank you. So is this where we got left off or got confused? Thank you. I think that's where where we had both gotten confused and then we talked about it, right? So I can keep going past that. Let's see, they're calling what we have the opportunity to change the mind of the people in the Trinity, and people seem to be leaving the ministry positions. The thought that with little any money they can. Okay, yeah. Okay, so Elder Tusk continues. I would say we don't get what this movement is all about. Your heart aches and my heart aches. But if your solution is to march, remember one of the police officers kneeled during the Black Lives Matter protest once said that we should put all of these violent Black men in concentration camps and let them die out. Really? He said that? Okay. Everyone can kneel and be photographed, and nothing will change unless we address the cause. People ask, what do we do then? Elder Tess, I've dealt with situations in this movement where fellowship member attacks fellowship member, calling the other one, you're a conservative. No, you're a conservative. Sitting next to you, all around you today on this meeting are people who know abuse, possibly people you still have a chip on your shoulder about, that you at best just decided to ignore to focus on your life, your marriage, your future. Separating yourselves from women in your own fellowship. We've had a couple of years of this message to learn to nurture and care for each other. And if you think your fellowship members irritate you, I'm not talking about ones with doctrinal error. We deal with them. But where there are women leaders, you can't respect. And an older woman that you think just talks too much and is abrupt, or put you in the room with these Yazidi women and they will start to irritate you. Those 4 Korean women, you'll wash your hands of them soon enough. Don't ask what big work we can do outside when we've had 2 years where God has said, deal with the inside, and there's a mixture of apathy and infighting. If we can't handle each other inside, you wouldn't be a single use to a Yazidi woman, because your goal should be to get them to heaven, true freedom. And the danger is you might find your neighbor, a Yazidi woman, more irritating than your fellowship member. It's the upper room. People now who want to do a big external work, I think unconsciously or not, they think that's easier, and it probably is. And God doesn't give us easy. God does not give us easy. I would like to march and kneel but I'm too busy interacting with priests in this movement to meet their needs. If each one of us cannot do that, we would fail miserably externally. There is no safe place yet. So that safe place is supposed to be us. We'll summarize before we close. What I want to address in this presentation was point 3, how we manage external information, sharing Adventist material from outside this movement. That was my goal, but I didn't want to do that without going through point 1 and 2. Point 1, the process of restoration. Our downfall was complete after 3 specific sins, Eve, Cain, and Ham, with the sin of Ham is a parallel to 1798, which should make people think the sin before the flood is a parallel to the 1260, something the likes of Jerry Falwell would never have been able to agree with. The time of the end, we retrace our steps back to physical restoration, walking with God in body, and finally, Eden restored. Eve's sin resulted in sexism. Cain's in a violation to the Sabbath, and Ham in racism and slavery. Time of the end, the first issue is racism and slavery, then the Sabbath and worship. Now is the issue of gender. The issues of nationalism are still present. God is still challenging us on nationalism. Therefore, he's attacking the Levites and the Nethinims on nationalism as well. But sexism was internal, was an internal and external issue in our Alpha history as well. Oberlin College, it was a turning point on education for Black people and for women. But the core of the issue was racism, 1850, slavery. The core of our issue in the Omega history is sexism, which encompasses gender and LGBT issues, which is why neither of these subjects make people so uncomfortable as this one does. I came to the second point. If we have a message on equality, what do we do with it? What have we been told to do with it? Upper room, it's not social activism. The world is descending into the abuses of 1260. You will not reform it. God has made clear that our job description is to change who we can by changing the mind. And my point was that every single one of us have a sphere of influence and a work to do. Okay, so I'm paraphrasing. She's saying we change our mind, and then each one of us works with the sphere of influence and do that work. Just like Victoria said, our sphere of influence. And I see the fights on our chat groups, the fellowships that distance each other. And my point was, if you want to fight with people in this movement, I hear people attack a woman and they think she's a conservative. She has conservative ideas. She doesn't practice equality. And I might know that she was raped when she was 15, and that's none of your business. But wouldn't it be nice if you knew the abuse the people around you had been through, that ministerially, I'm sorry, say it again. Ministerially, and thank you, and doctrinally, we will stand in our lot. It does not mean we tolerate abuse from other people, but we've had a couple of years where we've been instructed to do that, and too little has been done to press together. I want to address that point before we go on the subject of sources. We will do that next time. I want to make one more point. if I've understood anything over the past couple of weeks, it's how I get twisted, misquoted, and Elder Parminder. People put their own spin on things like principle and policy. People use the excuse of being a Christian and pressing together to overlook and excuse abuse. We don't do that. So please, on this issue, more than any other, do not misquote me. And that's the end, except for the prayer. And it's almost 7 or 3, sorry, 7. It's almost 3:30 here. So I'll go ahead and read the prayer. Dear Lord, we look with wonder at what you are attempting to do. We see that so many people love not just sin, but the results of it. They may not have enjoyed the fruit that Adam and Eve ate, but they love the sin and suffering that came from it. Isn't that somehow worse? I pray, Lord, that you'll open our eyes, that based on our cultures, our nationalism, our training, we will not attempt to call good evil and evil good, as we increasingly address the subject of homosexuality in this movement. May we see the seriousness of the test that we face. These things are not meant to be easy. Our biases are so ingrained. I pray, Lord, that your work of restoration will be a success for every head bowed and our loved ones. May we do all within our power while calling out and not tolerating abuse in this movement. Restore those who are willing, but provide the right nurture and support to those who have faced abuse, to the real flesh and blood people facing violence and persecution in the time of trouble in our very midst. May we support. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Does anyone have any more questions or comments on this study? It's a good one.
Yeah, this was a very good study. Thank you for presenting this. Earlier, just a little while ago, we mentioned root, radical, and then Elaine mentioned about radical feminism, dismantling patriarchy. And I was, as I was thinking through that, a horrible thought to my mind, and it was quite terrifying, actually, because the thought was, okay, we're dismantling the root of patriarchy. A radical feminist, there's no compromise. We're here to dismantle patriarchy. And so what is the root of patriarchy? And when I asked that question in my mind, well, what is the root of patriarchy? It's how we view God. That's what came to my mind. Right? Apis bull, right? This is how we view God. God is male, not just any male, male with conquering spirit, male with a fighting spirit, male that's dominating, male that is virile, right? Fertility, male that conquers anything and everything that opposes them, right? And that's the way we view God, because God is male, right? And that's where Apis bull, the study of Apis bull came from. Jesus is male. Lucifer is male. And here are these three males, at least, well, 2 against 1. I suppose. These males are fighting for dominance, right? And that's what patriarchy is all about. Dominance, male dominance. So the way I see it, the root of is how it's wrong, but it is how we view God. And that's what we have to dismantle. And that's what we have to go out there and convince to dismantle this wrong view of God. Well, if that's the wrong view of God, then what's the right view of God? It's equality. But the problem is, we might know what the wrong view of God is, but saying equality is easy to say, but I don't know what that equality looks like.
She did it. She talked about it in I think it was in the study from last week, that she tells the story how it's supposed to be about a genderless heaven, right? And sin rose up, and she goes through all that, and it spills out onto Adam. But she gives the story of it being a genderless heaven. So undoing what you're saying, the male, that because God is viewed as the authority, as the leadership. And if God is male, then we associate authority with male. And
Right.
but since God is not gendered, God has no gender, we have to come to understand and view things as equality, that there is no difference. In the other study that Christine did last week, there is no difference. They're the same. Male and female are the same. And there's no authority. So you had what we were looking at last week, when you have they're equal, right? They're the same. And then sin comes in, and woman now is down here with man and his foot on her neck. But man didn't stay where he was at. Man took power and control and authority that God had, that how they perceive it, that God had, and rose up and wants to exercise that authority on women, but based on gender. And because remember that they will take a young boy is considered a woman, a feminine, more, how do you say, more feminine behaving man is considered woman. So there's this power structure that men have to maintain and control. I don't know if that answered your question. It probably didn't, but.
Can I add something to the conversation? What came to my mind as Belle and Elaine, you both were speaking. Well, one thing is that we see the compare and contrast from those studies that people are the same and they are different, so there's a contrast, and there is a similarity, they are different and they are the same. And then my thoughts are trying to go away from me. But the other thought that I had, I lost it. It was from what Belle was saying. Okay, it has come back to me. I just lost it. But yeah, I just lost it.
And you're so much younger than me.
I know.
Happens to me all the time. And they are different. Thank you. Sorry, yes, they are. I think I said they are different, but Satan, what Lucifer did was pointed out the differences instead of looking at the similarities. So we have to come to look. I've been thinking about that verse, and somebody probably remembers where it's at. I didn't look it up. Is it Galatians, where it talks about there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, right? Heaven is without gender. And we have to understand that, because that's the kingdom of heaven. It's genderless. And I remember Elder Parmenter making a point that the fact that they were male and female was insignificant.
My thought came back, so I got it back. But so we're human beings, and so there is gender with human beings, and so but how that is defined is what's the problem, because people have created these boxes. They've defined what femininity looks like. They have defined what masculinity looks like. Society has defined it, you know, and the definition that they have given is wrong, you know. It's from a wrong, it's from a patriarchal culture, and that's the problem, because it's from a sexist lens in defining what femininity should look like and what masculinity should look like, and I mean, and correlating it to gender, you know, that
You know what might help? And I'm going to be listening to this one again, is the book, The Gender Knot. On that topic, Victoria, because there's a chapter on masculine and feminine that I found very helpful. And I'm going to be going back to revisit that.
I read that. But I'm just saying, like, I think that's part of the problem too, is that there's a wrong view of what it means to be feminine and what it means, or I guess, masculine, what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man. It's just the definition has been corrupted through patriarchy and sexist mindset. So that's kind of.
And that's precisely, that's precisely the point that you're making, Victoria, is that the definition has been corrupted. And, I know what Elder Tess says. I know what the study says. We're all equal. And heaven is genderless. But right now, in this state, those are all good words, because I don't know what that looks like. And as we study, as we learn, as we grow, I suppose we'll have a more a clear view of what that looks like. And we'll get the definition more correct of what does it mean to be genderless? What does it mean to be equal? So we practice that here as best as we understand it. But it's not our complete nature.
Right, that's what I'm saying, because we're human beings. We have
Right.
gender, like we were created different from the angels. So we, not we're the same and we're different. We're all God's creation, but we have different roles, that we play as far as what God has called each and every one of us to do. So, or what has happened in our own experience as a creation. So it's just really, really interesting. There is the fact that, angels are genderless, God is genderless, but human beings, we are gendered. I can't explain. Like we are, we have a spectrum. We're different and the same, but gender is real. Like, how can I put that? Gender exists among human beings. So
What Susan put in here is the path of the right direction, that gender free of the stereotypes, free of the stereotypes of gender.
Yeah.
The stereotypes that, and to say that a woman is feminine and a man is masculine, where you can have a woman who can act as masculine and a man that can act as or be as feminine. You can have both, you know what I mean? You could,
Right.
so it's understanding being free of all the stereotypes that are
Right.
placed upon them, men and women, because
Right.
the men deal with as well. I mean, that the pressures and power that's put upon them to be in power and what they do to maintain their status quo. You know, and then there's those that like it that way. But to undo the stereotypes of gender, because gender is, I don't understand it all, but I'm remembering back when Elder Tess was first starting to present this, I think in Germany, that there really aren't any differences. There may be the physical differences that we have, but the physical differences, but that when you look at the gendered brain and the gender not and the different things that she's taught, that gender is a
social construct. Is
Yes.
that what you're? Yeah, it's a social construct.
social
Yeah.
construct.
Yeah, it's created by society.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a question about like, you know how they have the alpha female and the alpha male, like they have these like or beta, you know, different things. And I wonder about those terms. I guess I have a question about those terms because I don't know if anybody knows about, because I kind of read a little bit on like when in society they refer to some women as like alpha females, or you know, it's like that dominant woman, you know, basically it's like a independent woman, like but I don't know, I just kind of wanted to know what people thought of, or what the movement thought of those terms as far as alpha female, alpha male, and stuff like that.
Way to go, Anna. Thank you. Anna found the gender knot on PDF. That's going to be very helpful. Thank you.
I just Googled it.
Yeah. I,
Gotta love Google, right?
yeah. I didn't come across it myself, but thank you. I'm so glad you found it.
Oh, I wanted to say a comment regarding, I don't know too much about that, Victoria, but it got me into thinking about the biology part, where Elder Tess has talked about all those atheistic, and I forget that other term for the men's choice or men's rights, I forgot. But they have all these beliefs that have been attributed to justify the male dominance. So I think all that we have to like put it all together. And also I was thinking about like how the patriarchal system is still practiced by the atheist, like the Apis bull, but I was thinking like, then how are they like worshiping the male part, you know, like the male dominance, because that's what they are, you know, that's what they worship, because they don't believe in God. Although some of them believe like in an entity, but we could safely say that, right? That those atheist men are still worshiping the Apis bull in the form that I guess biology and what else? I don't know what's the other term for that.
You mean
But
evolution or stuff like that?
I'm sorry?
Like evolution, is that where you're?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they have a lot of their beliefs based, and even within the scientific community, they always treat the female scientist totally different. They put them to do other things and so forth. So I am thinking that these terms have, you know, kind of come up in that sense to justify, you know, and describing the females as, you know, dominant and what have you, because they're still attributing all those quote male characteristics, which are wrong, because that's how we've been in our culture. That's how we were brought. I know that's how I was brought. So you gotta like destroy all these, you know, brought up, inculcated and what have you. And it also reminded me, I don't know if you guys heard of that guy Peterson. He's a psychologist, and he said one of the things that he said, like, who built all these buildings? Who constructed? Like, that argument has no value because women have not been allowed, you know, to have that opportunity to be engineers, to be able to explore that field, because they've always been kept, you know, on the bottom. So you have to, it's like so much stuff, you know, that we've just been, what do you call that? Tricked or deceived, you know? And so now we have to think in terms of genderless. To me, the female and the male, you know, like Adam and Eve, that was like procreation. You know, the way that I see it is like, okay, God created Adam and Eve, and now they reproduce, and, you know, we've learned that female and male. However, now we know that there's other genders, and there's people also that they don't even identify with a gender, which, like, oh, it seems to me confusing. Like, and then like their pronouns now. And to me, it's getting overwhelmed, because now I have to learn. I have to educate myself. They have pronouns. They want us to learn them. And when I see all these people like, no, you don't get to have your own pronoun. And it's like, that is hating, you know, on the LGBT community, because to me, what God is telling us, like, we are special. We've been called, these people are special. And now we have to learn, you know, learn about them and learn to love them, because they are the most, what do you call that? Like the most outcast right now, because they're being hated by the conservative evangelicals, but then they're also hated by the atheist, the male dominant, because they still considered that, you know, like higher. So that's why they're also like, so I understand, it's just overwhelming, you know, but at the same time, I think that we are getting educated, and we're learning all this and learning how to share it. What happened to me, like this week, one of my coworkers, I didn't start the conversation, but lo and behold, we ended up going into, she's a pro-life. So when we started talking about, like, she started talking about Biden was bad because he's Catholic and he's not against abortion. So she started saying that, right? And then when I told her, well, the woman has the choice, you know, to decide what to do with her life, and that baby is in her womb, like that's hers to decide. And you should, and I told her, I go, well, don't you see all the children that are so unwanted? Who's going to take care of them? And then she after I said that, she was just like totally upset, and she was like, well, life is life, and we have to protect life. And so from there, I was like, I kept quiet. I noticed that she got upset, so I just like kept quiet, and I wasn't going to talk about that subject anymore. But I realized that our character is going to be tested, you know, with people around you. And I think we have to just still be bold and be and just maintain our position, you know. And I'm learning that people are just gonna be mad or angry, and let them be. And I think we have to move on, because we're eventually gonna find somebody that's gonna listen, and they're gonna be questioning, like, oh, that makes sense. Like, if you love God, you need to love your neighbor, and so forth, you know. And that includes LGBTQ. You know, it's not none of your business if you don't understand all their, you know, their what do you call that? Like that group, like you don't understand. But God hasn't called us for that. He's just telling us, you know, to love them, and to what is it? To respect that they have every right that we have. We cannot apply, you know, the difference, you know, like, okay, you guys are allowed to get married. Oh, but you cannot live right here next door neighbor. You cannot be like, we're gonna, you know, all these laws that don't make sense, to be totally accepting of them. So I think that we definitely need a lot of faith and patience. And that's my my thoughts.
I think it's different than that when it comes to LGBTQ. I think it's more, I'm trying to think of the words that Elder Tess uses. Really goes deep into the gender issue. I don't know, I had thoughts to what you said, but now I'm losing the point that you were saying, but I think it goes deeper than just the it's beyond, it's part of the whole gender issue that to be, I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say. Be whatever gender you identify with, that is who you are. That is who you are.
Yes, I'm sorry if I was just mumbling a lot of things, because sometimes I also I have the idea in my brain and just come out like how I want it. This is what I mean, But yeah, it's way deeper, Elaine. I know that gender, because it entails so much for the simple fact of when you think about yourself, how you have all these rights, right? But the point is that they're not, they already have all these bills pending or signed and everything, just so they can go against them. So there's that unacceptance eventually of their existence. I don't know how to say it, their existence, because it's like they're allowing them to, this is how I want to see it. You can exist, but you cannot live. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How can you do that? How can you say, okay, you could exist, but you cannot live, because they're not going to have all these rights that they're God-given.
Like back in racism,
yeah,
slavery, you can exist, but you're not going to have what we have.
Exactly. So that's just an oxymoron. Is that the term? Doesn't make sense. Yeah.
And I really like what Susan says. No, Eva, it's good to hear your thoughts. You are not mumbling. You are exercising your voice. So
Yep.
Thank you, Susan. That was beautiful to say.
Yep. So definitely we got more to unravel to better understand it all. Because there's something more to it than there's something more to the gender issue when it comes to LGBT, and I know I need a lot of understanding in that area.
I have a question. How did the Gender Not book come about? Did Elder Tess reference it, or is it a book that you came across?
I saw that question you asked. I'm sorry, I was going to repeat it and ask if anybody remembers where she mentioned it, because I don't remember where she mentioned it. I know that I, a long time ago, got it on Audible, but never listened to it. And then because I was looking for the Gendered Brain, and I wound up with the wrong book, and then I got the Gendered Brain. So then I realized I had the Gender Not, and it was mentioned, I think, by Luke a while back. And but I don't know where she mentioned it. If anybody remembers where Elder Tess may have mentioned it.
No, I'm sorry. Is that a book written by a female, I believe, or
The Gendered
maybe not?
Is by a man. Is written by a man.
Oh, okay. So this is different. Okay.
Yeah.
The Gendered Brain, yeah, it's written by the female, Regina Ribbon.
Yeah, sorry, Gloria, I don't have the answer to that one.
Oh, but she does mention it, refer to it, Elder Tess?
I can't say that I remember if she does or doesn't. She may have, but I have poor memory.
I thought she did, but I can't find where, so I couldn't tell you where. But I thought I've heard her say it.
Either her or it could have been Elder Parmenter as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think she did recommend for us to read that book, but I just can't remember exactly the title.
We're a good group with great memories. Oh, I know mine's not in tip-top shape. Does anybody have anything they want to add before we close for the day? Good discussion. I'm really grateful for both these studies and this morning as well.
As Elder Perminder said, this was in the study, the presentation of Eden to Eden, Make the Right Choice presentations, the Eden to Eden camp meeting last year. So you were born that way. You didn't have a choice. Homosexuality is no more a choice than heterosexuality. And whatever gender you were born with, that's who you are.
You mean whatever gender you identify with? Is that what you meant? You don't mean
Right.
biologically,
Right.
like if you're born with male body parts, then that's what gender you are. You didn't mean that, right?
Well, all of those, whether you were born a male, whether you're born a female, whether you're born heterosexual, whether you're born homosexual, transgender, you were born that way, and you didn't just one day choose to become a homosexual.
Right.
That's who you are.
Right. And entitled to, as I think it was Ava that was saying, entitled to the same rights as anyone else. So you have the prototype, which we've been looking at, and then the issues in the history of the Alpha. The prototype was this white Christian nationalism. We still have that, but they viewed themselves as the prototype, and we've come further into that with the Apis bull and this male power and authority and hierarchy and all that goes with the Apis bull and that whole mindset. So anything that doesn't fit the Apis bull mindset or the prototype, I guess is the way you would say it, they set themselves up, they're the prototype. Then anybody that doesn't fit that prototype mold, like with the issue of racism back in the Alpha, they aren't deserving or are not entitled to the same rights because they're subhumans. Women are subhumans. If you're gay or lesbian, you're subhuman. If you're transgender, you're subhuman. You're not the prototype. You don't fit the prototype, and you're not entitled to what the prototype is entitled to.
That sounds like Hitler.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really amazing how they twist it all around and say that the Democrats are the fascist ones. I have a really hard time following the twistings of how they point the fingers like that. The master race, yeah.
One thing I've learned by watching the GOP and the far right is that if they're saying something about someone else, they're, and it's wrong, that they're actually talking about themselves, that they don't know
Yes.
it. I mean, they're projecting everything that they know about themselves on everybody else.
And as a matter of fact,
It's so crazy.
doesn't that sound, doesn't that sound like the enemy? What he does, everything bad he attributed to God.
Yeah.
So everybody can think it's God's fault.
Exactly.
Good point. It's gonna get a lot crazier.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pause my mic here for a second. I'll open up what Anna sent so that way I can save it and watch it later. When I go to open up a video and there's talking, and sometimes there's some wacky commercial that comes on first. It's embarrassing. But good discussion. I'm thankful for all of it, all the input. And
yeah,
we're coming a little closer to what, listen to what they say. Don't listen to what they say, and don't listen to what they say. I did post that article, well, it was in the teacher chat, but it was you guys can look it up, anybody that didn't see it. I can send it if you want it as well, but it was about Reagan. I was trying to search out Ronald Reagan and his, what's the word I'm looking for? His, word I'm looking for, and I can't escape in my mind.
It's policies on women.
Yeah, policies is probably as close as I'll come to the one I was thinking of, but yeah, I think policies on women, yeah. And it was the Washington Post, and just I think if you search two-faced Reagan and Washington Post, you'd probably find it. But the very last thing it says at the end, because after it goes through the policies, how Reagan spoke as if he was pro women's rights, but his administration was tearing down the Equal Rights Amendment and women's rights, and it goes through this list of things, and then it says at the very last to watch what they do, not listen to what they say, something along those lines. So, but it was
something like actions speak louder than words.
yeah, because he was not practicing what he professed, and people put him up as this big hero. Record, Christine, that's the one I was looking for. I had it in my head specifically because I posted it on a post that my nephew had posted about Reagan, putting not, he's young, probably
right,
innocently thinking that Reagan was this big hero for, when it comes to racism, and I just said check out his record on women. And so anyways, I'm sure if you searched it, two-faced Washington Post and Ronald Reagan, you'd probably find it.
There's also something about abortion that he said, and I don't remember exactly, but it's just supporting the pro-life ideology.
And if I remember right, he was pro-choice as governor of California. Is that right? And
I'm not sure.
That's what I thought I heard that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was. He was pro-choice as governor of California, and then I don't know. I think it was the moral majority thing. The whole thing came in and saw it. I don't remember all the details of it, but he took on the pro-life platform and the evangelicals. So, well, anyways, it was a really blessed Sabbath. I enjoy our Sabbaths together. It helps sharpen us, and I'm thankful. So God bless everybody.
God bless.
you all.
Happy Sabbath.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Happy
Sabbath.
Sabbath.
Happy rest of your Sabbath. Good night.
Night.
Right.
Thank
See you
you.
Wednesday.
See you Wednesday. God bless you.
Wednesday.